So for those of you who are already present here, welcome and good afternoon for those of you here in North America, and good evening to our colleagues in Europe. To the session on preserving Ukraine's cultural heritage and historical record. This event is sponsored by the Petro Jacyk program for the study of Ukraine at the Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at the Monk School of Global Affairs, as well as by the University of Toronto Libraries. My name is Ksenya Kiebuzinski. I'm co-director of the Jacyk program, and I'm also the librarian for Slavic and East European resources at the University of Toronto Libraries, where I have the privilege, among other things, of stewarding our Ukrainian collections, assisting researchers with their reference and research questions, building the collections in all sorts of formats, books, periodicals, manuscripts, electronic material and whatnot. But what I do pales in comparison to what our 5 distinguished guests are currently doing to save Ukraine's cultural heritage and to keep the historical record. For a bit of background, as of July 4th, UNESCO has verified the damage of 150 cultural sites in Ukraine, 71 religious sites, 12 museums, 30 historic buildings, 21 buildings dedicated to cultural activities, 16 monuments, 7 libraries, and these are mostly in the Donetsk, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Luhansk, and Kyiv regions. According to the Ukraine's Ministry of Culture and Information, these numbers are much higher, more closer to 400 cultural heritage sites. It's considered that Russia is consciously or deliberately choosing these targets in order to achieve its main goal, which is to destroy the centers of Ukrainian culture, and that Russian occupiers are attempting to deny the Ukrainian people the places that provide them with a collective memory and shared history. What we're going to do today is we're going to hear from 5 cultural experts whose dedication, who are dedicated to countering this destruction and carrying out practical war work to save the past, but not only that, but to save the present for future research. I'm going to introduce all of them at the beginning, and then we will invite each of our guests to speak. So Anna Kijas is head of the Lilly Music Library at Tufts University and one of the co-founders of Saving Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Online, Sucho, which has gotten a lot of very good publicity for good reasons. And I'm glad that University of Toronto is partnered with them in terms of offering server space for data storage. But Anna, aside from doing this important work, is also a historian of 19th century music and also very much interested in digital humanities tools and methods of kind of historical music, applying them to historical music research and the application of standards for open access research and publishing. Anatolii Khromov is head of the State Archival Service of Ukraine. Prior to taking up this position, he managed restoration and digitization of archival funds at the State Archives of Odessa region. And prior to that, he was a production director in archival information systems and deputy director of the branch State Archive of the Security Service of Ukraine. He's got many research interests, history of Cossacks of the 19th century, archival affairs, digitization and access to archives, and other topics. Bohdan Shumylovych is an art historian and head of public history programs at the Center for Urban History and associate professor at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. His research interests are media history and the history of television in Central and Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, as well as urban creativity, media art, and visual studies. Oksana Kuzmenko is leading research fellow of the Department of Social Anthropology of the Ethnology Institute of the National Academy of Sciences in Ukraine. She does extensive field work studying folklore of Western and Central Ukraine. Her research interests have in the past focused on war folklore, so this precedes the current war, as well as dynamics of folklore tradition, methods of conceptual analysis of verbal folklore texts, and other topics. And since February of this year, she's been collecting folk texts about the current war conditions. And then Catarina Buchatskiy is co-founder of the Shadows Project, which is a Ukrainian cultural organization with the mission of protecting and popularizing Ukrainian history and culture. And since the war began, the Shadows Project has also been providing practical support to museums in Ukraine, providing equipment to store Ukrainian art and artifacts to protect cultural heritage from Russian bombardment. She's also a student at Stanford University studying international relations with a focus on international security, which seems appropriate for the work she's doing. So to begin, I'm going to start with Anna and ask her to kind of tell us how to account for the speed in which the work of the Sucho team was initiated and the overwhelming response from volunteers doing the web archiving, because it really happened, it seems to me, within days. And if you can tell us about what has been accomplished so far and whether the focus of this work has shifted since February, March, April, whether there's now a new effort. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Anna.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. I'm very pleased to be here with you all today. I'm going to share my screen. I do have a few slides prepared, so I'll use those as I try to answer the questions you presented. Okay. So, Saving Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Online is an initiative that is coordinated by myself, along with Quinn Dombrowski and Sebastian Majsterowicz. It has grown as a collective effort with over 1,300 cultural heritage professionals in our Slack channel. And our goal is to identify and archive at-risk websites and digital content in Ukrainian cultural heritage institutions during the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian War. And part of the goal is to web archive these materials so that when the institutions and the country is ready to rebuild, we can return their digital contents at the end of the war if they need it. So it's a type of digital repatriation. After months of accusations from NATO and international communities that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine, Russia launched a full invasion on February 24th. And this timeline that I've created here just shows you sort of the speed in which we formed Sucho and the work that we have been doing. So within a few days following the invasion, I put out a call on Twitter for emergency web archiving. I am part of a large music library community, and I at first reached out to my colleagues in that community to focus on music library collections that we knew were digitized. And from there, I started speaking with Sebastian Majsterowicz and Quinn Dombrowski, and within a few days on March 1st, we decided to launch Sucho. So the next few months, you'll see between March and July, we have been web archiving various websites, digital collections, and our content has grown from 20 terabytes in March to over 52 terabytes of data that we've web archived as of just a few days ago in July. And it's difficult to quantify the number of websites, but we're around 5,000 or so that have been web archived. And of course, those websites have hundreds or thousands of pages and digital artifacts. As Ksenia, you had mentioned, the UNESCO and the Ministry of Culture has been identifying sites that have been damaged, physical sites. And so this is a screenshot of recorded war crimes that is on the Ministry of Culture's website. We are actually using the information from UNESCO and the Ministry of Culture to basically cross-check the content that we are web archiving to make sure that if there are digital footprints, if born digital content exists or digitized content in museums and libraries, theaters, etc., we are trying to web archive that material. And so this is a process that we are using to also prioritize what is being web archived. Whoops, let me go back. Sorry about that. There we go. Oh, now my slides are all over. Here we go. So just a map of, this map of Ukraine here is illustration from the virtual museum. And just to highlight what we are prioritizing, so as I've mentioned already, we are focusing on web archiving digital content. So that means we are looking at content that is hosted on servers within Ukraine, but also on .ua domains that may be hosted elsewhere. These websites are from institutions of all sizes, public and national libraries and archives, historical societies, music academies, theaters, as well as rural museums, monasteries, and churches. As I already mentioned, they may be digitized or born digital content. And we have a toolkit that consists of several software and technology that we're using for this work. And this toolkit is really what allows us to bring in a variety of volunteers who have any range of technological expertise, from very minimal knowledge of programming or use of command line to much more advanced programming skills. So we are using web archiving software and collaboration tools. And the baseline tool is the Wayback Machine of the Internet Archive. All of our websites that we crawl, we first submit a batch into the Wayback Machine using their Google batch submission function. And then the cultural websites that are media heavy and may have interactive or things like 3D tours, navigation structures that are difficult to crawl, we're using our suite of web recorder tools, including the web browser tricks crawler, which is a high fidelity crawling system. We also use custom code as necessary for content that is really uncrawlable with other tools. And on the right here, you see Google Sheets and Slack are what we're using for our collaboration, because again, we are trying to make sure that we can bring on as many volunteers using low barrier tools to get them to, to grow their own expertise and to identify tasks that they feel comfortable working with. This is just a snapshot of our giant spreadsheet where people are working through different tasks and where we keep track of all of the different domains and websites that we are web archiving with different tools that are being used. Our infrastructure, so as I mentioned, we are using a suite of web-based tools, but we have also a crowd crawling tool using Docker containers. So the web recorder is something that can be installed, and originally we started with having it installed on our own machines before Ilya Kramer, the developer of web recorder, was able to create a browser-based tool that now anyone can use directly on the web. We also have donated cloud server capacity, so Amazon Web Services has donated the majority of our cloud server capacity, and then we are also mirroring all of our content across different institutions in Europe and North America. As for our workflow, we have volunteers who are identifying websites and digital content. They are identifying URLs that then get entered into our spreadsheet. We have volunteers who are curating metadata for the contents that is being web archived, as well as people who are monitoring the development of on-the-ground attacks. So we are prioritizing which institutions we are going to be web archiving their content based on whether we know that there's an attack in Kharkiv, for example, or Mariupol. We also do a lot of triage where when we identify different websites. So for example, if there is a difficult database structure that we are trying to web crawl, we may need to use the skill sets of our volunteers who have some programming knowledge. We are using automatic, semi-automatic, and manual web crawling techniques. And then of course we have a number of people who are fluent in Ukrainian as well as Russian and Cyrillic script and can review all of the content that we are web archiving for quality control. So there are quite a few different steps that we are using in this project. As I mentioned, the situation monitoring or prioritization of what we are web archiving, one of our volunteers, Erica Peasley, is a risk analyst in her day job, and she has been running a group of volunteers who are doing situation monitoring and are paying attention day by day, hour by hour to various reports of attacks. And this again helps us prioritize which contents and web archives or web sites we are archiving. There's of course still much more to be done and that we are preparing to do for the long term. So as I mentioned, we have a group of volunteers who are curating metadata. One of these collections is metadata that is in the Internet Archive for objects that were downloaded directly from different institutional sites. We're also continuing to identify and prioritize more websites. So this is an ongoing initiative that for now does not see an end until we have certainty that we've identified and web archived as much of the cultural heritage as possible. The quality control is of course a big job, and reviewing all of the content is going to take quite a bit of time. We are exploring and upgrading our storage solutions as we go. So as I mentioned, we have been working with Amazon for web storage. We are also mirroring our contents across different institutions. And so the conversations are ongoing about, what do we need in order to upgrade our storage solutions to make sure that this content is secure. We are building relationships with Ukrainian cultural institutions. So from the beginning, we've been connecting with colleagues in Ukraine across different institutions such as archives, libraries, museums, and we are also speaking with aid organizations in order to identify how we can connect institutions who are in Ukraine with physical digitization equipment. So that is actually one of our next steps. Is we are currently in the process of sending digitization equipment to Ukrainian institutions, and I can speak more about that if people have questions in during the discussion period. So as you can imagine, the beginnings of Sucho following the invasion was very much reliant on many, many volunteers. And this chart here, which Quinn had created for us for the presentation, just demonstrates how the shift of people versus institutions happens over time. And so our volunteers started in the thousands, and we still have several hundred who are working every week to web archive this contents. But we really need to start thinking about what is it that institutions can do to help proactively web archive digital cultural heritage, because as people are living things, and we fade, and we start to get tired, and we need a break. So that's our next step, is really to talk to institutions and think into the future about what we can do in order to make this a long-term initiative beyond Sucho. As I mentioned, advocating for proactive web archiving, right? So that can take on a different, that can look differently. It can be an international network of mutual web archiving. There can be some kind of web archiving week that's an international celebration. There are many different things that we can do to ensure that some cultural heritage materials are web archived at least on an annual basis. And finally, I'll say that as we are building these relationships with Ukrainian institutions, we are in the process of working with UNESCO and the Digital Library, or excuse me, and the IFLA to build a National Digital Library of Ukraine. So we are just starting conversations about what that will look like, and we are including our Ukrainian colleagues from the Ministry of Culture, from the Ukrainian Library Association, and many others as stakeholders. So I'm happy to speak more about any of what I just presented on in the Q&A, and thank you. Visit sucho.org if you want to learn more about the initiative or how to help.
Thank you so much. That's really exciting prospects for this kind of moving to institutional, getting institutional frameworks and a national digital library. So this is a perfect segue to Anatolii, who I know the State Archives of Ukraine has been digitizing for a long time. Finding aids, opposite, archival guides, and documents. And I was wondering if, well, aside from commenting on things that you wish to elaborate on, has Russia's war in Ukraine changed the level of this activity? Have you found more partners from outside Ukraine for funds and equipment, similar to what Sucho is doing to help expedite the digital preservation of material? And what can you share with us? And I know you may not be able to say everything possible, but what can you share with us about the condition, state, or evacuation of archives from those areas under the heaviest fire? So please, Anatolii.
Thank you. Thank you, Ksenia. First of all, thank you for invitations. It's a big honor. It's a very interesting for me because such discussion now important for our colleagues. Unfortunately, I haven't presentations because last night we have attack from Russian cyber hacker groups, and it's a new problem for us. Not only the physical storage, physical process of saving our documents, even the problems of our official websites, it's a new problems for us. A few words about our organizations, about archival systems of Ukraine. I'm the head of State Archival Service. It's a government organizations which provide government policy in the archival sphere. We have a big system of state archives in Ukraine, 9 central state archives, 25 regional archives in every region, in every oblast. For example, state archives of Odessa region, Kherson, Kiev, in our. And we have a branch state archives in every ministry or agency in our state organizations. And all our fonds, if you talk about so-called national archival fonds, it's historical, it's important documents. It's more than 86 million folders. How many documents, how many articles, we don't know. It's billions articles. And unfortunately, we today have maybe 5% of these documents in digital. Because the process of digitalization in Ukraine started maybe 20, 25 years, but actually real digital process started maybe 3 years ago. Today we have, there are many agreement for collaborations from different non-government and government organizations from countries of Europe, Israel, and, for example, from United States. There are many countries help us to digitalize. One of our general project, it's an agreement for collaboration with American non-government organization Family Search International. It's a very famous corporations, non-government corporation, and we try to organize agreement of family search and all our state archives. Today we have 3 agreements of family search with 3 central state archives and 10 regional state archives. It's very important because family search organize a high speed of digitalization. For example, only one project in Poltava State Regional Archives in 2021 did 50% all digital copies in Ukraine. It's a very high speed. It's we hope in perspective of 5-7 years to digitalize all documents about genealogy. And it's interesting not only for our researchers in Ukraine, it's important for in our countries because there are many peoples have traces from Ukraine, even so famous officials of United States like Antony Blinken have traces from Ukraine. And our celebrities from Hollywood and in our so it's about our digitalized process, but there are many problems with physical storage of our documents because unfortunately we have now some archives which were damaged by Russian bombs, and we have some archives which were destroyed. Unfortunately, in Chernihiv, actually destroyed all documents from so-called KGB archives about process of great terror, Stalin repressions in the 20th century on the territory of Ukraine. We know about process of destroying social archives in Kherson regions. It's documents of solely in our social questions, and it's important for the people who live on this territory. About our digital copies, we have support from our colleagues from many countries. For example, in March 2022, we signed agreement with National Archives of United Kingdom, and all our copies, our digital copies from Ukraine, now we can storage on the server in UK. But the main our problems is a problem of archival space in our storage, because in all countries there are many documents and we have not any new place, any space for documents to the moving to the process of evacuation from southern eastern Ukraine. And now we organize a special bank account we plan to have charitable volunteer support from every countries, from our colleagues, because we need to finish the process of building new underground depositories, underground storage for our documents. And now we finish this process, and if it interesting for you, in our official site, you can find all information about this bank account. But today, unfortunately, our website under Russian attack, so you cannot read this information, but we hope maybe on Monday it will be okay. So thank you. It's a short information about our work in so difficult time in Ukraine.
Thank you, Anatolii, and those of you who are here, our participants, you feel free to add questions into the Q&A as we proceed with our presentations. And if you want to address a particular speaker, you can put that in the Q&A. Next, I invite Bohdan from the Center for Urban History in Lviv, which I consider to be at the forefront of kind of cross-cultural research in Ukraine, and in terms of programming, as well as a leader in digital humanities. I'm thinking of the Lviv Interactive and Lviv Streets projects as incredible models and resources for study of urban history in Ukraine. It would be wonderful to see these kinds of projects emulated, especially for those cities that have now been largely destroyed, to make them living again, at least in that capacity. But I'm thinking that perhaps the work of the center right now has shifted somewhat in response to the war. I know that many of you are working as volunteers to help displaced people, as well as refugees who are in transit to Poland or further abroad. But so what can you tell us about the work of your center, such as, for example, collecting testimonies from war? So over to you, Bohdan.
Okay, thank you, Ksenia. I can share my screen. I have a presentation. So it would be more useful.
If you can speak loudly.
Yes. I hope you hear me, yeah? So I am from the Center for Urban History. This is an institution in Lviv, in Western Ukraine. And we obviously changed a lot since the start of the war. Our center was transformed into a temporary shelter for people internally displaced, and we have several waves of these people coming and going, and we had people from Bucha, from Izum, now mainly from Luhansk region, from Kramatorsk, and we still don't know how we will end up with this shelter, but it helped us also to initiate one of the projects, and this is oral history interviewing. But in the early stage in March, we were connecting to various institutions, asking whether they can help us, especially with support of scholars or people who cannot leave Ukraine, because according to war legislation, males cannot really exit the country, and a lot of people lost their jobs and placements. So we made a model that, for instance, Institute for Human Sciences and Körber Stiftung, they gave us some funds, and then we distributed these funds among locals, so offering fellowships. But then also we started making archiving initiatives, and here some few words about them. So we have this mentioned by Ksenya Lviv Interactive project, which is mainly dealing with digital media. And this the head of this project, my colleague, he initiated archiving media channels in Telegram. This is who don't know, this is a popular social media in the former Soviet Union. And what is important, it basically offers you the possibility to archive everything that is on the channel without any special permissions, or without using, like Sutra, without using these special web archiving programs, so software. And by now we have many terabytes of information. These various chats, like from in cities which were occupied or still are occupied, to channels of famous people, and we still have a lot of thinking how we can actually work with this data later on. Then having a shelter, we had a lot of people in transition, so we started collecting oral history testimonies. Now we have more than 100 interviews. This is a very important project made in cooperation with international institutions. It is secured, so all the interviews are doubled. So part is archived in Luxembourg and another part here in Lviv. Then my colleague from Urban Media Archive, he collects images, photographs, moving images. And I personally, since I am teaching at the Catholic University, I started with my students collecting diaries and dreams. And we were thinking about making kind of ego documents archived for the future. And here you see, for instance, our recent event, which was the set of talks with Jeff Deutsch, who made the Syrian archive very important initiative. Then Sarah Day Thompson from the Edinburgh University, she shared with us a lot of information about various methods of archiving social media. And then Niels Brugger from Denmark, and his professor specializing in web archiving. So we are not just collecting, but looking for advice and developing various forms of possibilities together with our partners abroad. And testimonies of war, as I mentioned, oral histories, they are made in cooperation with Polish Academy of Sciences, and then University of St. Andrews in the UK. And then also all the data protection and regulations. This was helped to develop Center for Contemporary and Digital History of Luxembourg University. So this is also international project. And what I mentioned, the Ukrainian Catholic University and my students, we started with a group of 50, then it grew to 70 people who volunteered to make diaries. And then later on, we also started collecting dreams. And dreams, you may wonder why dreams, but this is widely discussed aspect. So Gordon Lawrence, who shaped this idea of social dreaming, so the dreams that are not just personal stories, but then also belong to collective experience. He encountered this book, The Third Reich of Dreams by Charlotte Berat, which was published in 1968. And his idea about social dreaming was influenced by this collection of dreams, which Charlotte Berat collected during the Second World War. And there are various theories, at least 4 theories of dreams, but the important issue is that dreams are also considered as ego documents, especially since they are recalled by a conscious person after he or she had a dream. So we believe that dreams and diaries, they are powerful instruments to reflect the reality. and also give us a sort of a bit of different sources for the future historians or researchers who will work with this horrible war. We believe that EGO documents that we collect now are witnesses of history, and they give us and will give the future scholars possibilities to look into also, let's say, personal accounts, yes? And here are just a few more slides. We also collect dreams, not just from students, but from anybody who volunteers, and people send us dreams and diaries from various cities. We publish about these projects. We have now partnership with the University of Jyväskylä. This is in Finland. Magdalena Zolkos helps us to develop bigger project on diaries and dreams. From Columbia University, Offer Dines, who is teaching a course on diaries and dreams and EGO documents at the Columbia University. He also participate and is our partner, and then also Billy Glue from Manchester is another partner. So this is just to show you that we are not working alone in these projects. We try to kind of make various forms of cooperations and consortiums, and unfortunately we cannot really work with cultural heritage, but we work with intangible things like, you know, stories, personal accounts, which will become sort of heritage, cultural heritage. Yeah, thank you for your attention.
I agree. It's absolutely it's the cultural heritage of the psyche that definitely will, it will be the historical record that will be studied. And I think about the terrible losses of the historical record from World War I and World War II, the large gaps of we lack a lot of testimonies. And so this may be the most documented of the wars, so that for historians and other scholars, you will be providing a rich base of study for a long time forward. I now want to shift a little bit. We're going to go to Oksana, and Oksana, I was recently reading, I think just this week, about a PhD candidate at Indiana University's Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology, who also reached out to the American Folklore Society, looking to find a safe space for data for Ukrainian folklorists, such as interviews that you collect, recordings of songs, and photographs and other visual documentation of traditional cultural expression and heritage art, such as embroidery or ceramics or anything of that kind, and that they were looking, these ethnographers are looking for places to store their data. And so they've been working with Indiana University and the American Folklore Society, but you engage in similar work. And what can you share with us about the challenges you face to record and to preserve Ukraine's folklore? So please, Oksana, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to the seminar, Ksenya. Good evening, good day, everybody. The first months of the current war in Ukraine have already shown how urgent the issue of organizing the preservation of national cultural heritage is. For folklorists, two aspects of such an activity are important. Firstly, it is a preservation of archival field materials, and secondly, conducting new field recording in special wartime conditions. Is this activity possible? Yes, of course. In my view, a good time to start field work, as they say, is here and now, but the awareness of necessity of the ethnographic and folklorist field work comes when the scholars get over their shock state of the acceptance that the war, and only then are the first steps made in that direction. Therefore, I consider the creation of backup for saved records and a possibility of uploading to cloud of the private, digitized field records of the folklore gathered by the Ukrainian researchers, provided by fellow colleagues from the USA and Canada, to be one of the most effective ways to support and preserve the cultural heritage. During the first weeks of the war, I took advantage of Irina Voloshina, associate instructor at Indiana University, free of charge offer and tried to upload my archive in between our alarms. Today, I would like to express my special gratitude to Irina for this initiative. Already on 1st March, through Facebook, she turned to the folklorist and ethnomusicologist with a proposal to preserve the expedition materials. The support was incredibly timely. Admittedly, I did not manage to upload everything. Certain files failed to record. Consequently, I decided to make another copy of the archive and a hard disk and sent it abroad to my friends, my colleagues, for safekeeping. This summer, I am going to continue the work on digitizing my materials, especially recording from the 1990s in collaboration with a fellow colleague, Dr. Andrei Vovchak. He is head of the Laboratory of Folkloristic Studies at the Lviv Ivan Franko University. A few years ago, I brought my field records, including the Ukrainian insurance army songs, rifleman songs, among them Oi u Luzі Червона Калина. This is a very famous song from Khmelnytsky, Lviv, Ternopil, and Chernivtsi region of 1990s, the beginning of 2000s, to be digitized. When the war began, I was concerned I might not be able to save the audio cassettes and the photo films. That is the reason why I believe that procuring funding for the recording of pieces of folklore, in particular the rare ones, is an urgent matter in the situation of constant threat of missile attacks. Fortunately, the Department of Archive Manuscript and Photological Record Funds at the Relsky University in Kiev, which has unique records of folklore of the period of the First World War and the Ukrainian Revolution, as well as the Volodymyr Gnatyuk Fund, I have been using for many years for my research, scans manuscripts. I know that a great deal has been scanned, but not everything. Unfortunately, the digitized materials and their lists are still not available to the researcher these days. One more, the Institute of Ethnology, where I work, essentially does not have funding for digitizing the archived funds. Anything. By virtue of my professional themes, which have always been related to the Ukrainian folklore of the First World War, Second World War, I was aware of the importance for philologists of being hot on the trail and recording early any samples of creative work. Roughly on the third day of the war, on my laptop, I created a dedicated folder. Within the folder, I have divided the subgroups into the genres, and I am trying to track the appearance of every piece of folklore, seen on social networking sites, sent to me by my friends or relatives, or heard. Moreover, I ask my friends to pay personal attention and be responsive to the manifestation of folklore work and folklorization. I ask respondents and my friends to record themselves. The idea of collecting war songs and stories, which Volodymyr Hnatyuk announced 100 years ago during the First World War, remains relevant today. I fully agree with famous folklorist thought that such collection will be of a special significance as it will express people's view on war, their attitude and response to it. In my own viewpoint, in comparison with the past, now the authors themselves or bearers of the folklore tradition often register newly created texts. Apparently, many people know about websites with jokes about the current Russian-Ukrainian war. Moreover, this war actualized folklore creation among our neighbors. I saw an interesting menu in one of local cafes last week in Warsaw. Several Polish jokes about Putin and the Russian army were written on the last page. These texts were reworked version of well-known Soviet-era political anecdotes about Stalin and Brezhnev. It is important for me that in this text, the image of the Russian soldier is typologically the same. His permanent features: liar, uneducated, hunger, rapist. Folk art of the current Russia-Ukrainian war is powerful wave of the new text of various genres. Anecdotes, slogans, internet memes, humorous spells, satirical monostrophes, prayers, author poetry, narratives about prophetic dreams, memory about the bombing experience. I have started recording an interview with Irina, who fled from Kharkiv and lived with me for 3 months. I recorded Irina twice, with a 4-day break in between. The question for the first session was a prophetic dream, about which Irina started telling me when we had just met. In conclusion, I would like to say that new times have made adjustment primarily in the forms of expression and speed of transmission of folklore and with things of folklore texts. The enduring folklore discourse of popular protest and resistance of Ukrainian to aggressive action of the Russian aggressor remains unchanged. In my opinion, visual and verbal texts of folk creativity, a special form of war experience, should be recorded and preserved. Even today, there are life stories in oral history and the plots of folk tales about heroic deaths in war, humanity, and mutual aid during rocket attacks, life under occupation, and brutality of the occupiers, and many, many other plots from this current war. So, thank you.
Thank you, Oksana, for sharing your incredibly important work and kind of call to action. It seems that a lot of this work is happening organically and successfully, but whether introducing a more kind of institutional structure, whether that would be a positive thing or not, it seems like things are in some ways working, but there's always need for more money, more equipment, and more people, and more server space. So thank you for this. We are now going to turn to Catarina with the Shadows Project, which I think I really like the progression of how everything has been going, because I believe you take an approach of, and correct me if I'm wrong, of correcting misattributed Ukrainian cultural and historical figures through social media, and social media seems to be incredibly powerful to many of these projects, which is interesting to consider. How does, and I know you also are coordinating material assistance, so vital things that Anatolii mentioned, of things that are needed for material objects, because not everything can be stored in a cloud or web archived or put on hard disks. So I know you're helping with that as well. So how does all this work, and how do you engage with volunteers and mobilize people and financial resources?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just introduce quickly what Shadows is and the story of Shadows, and explain a little bit what we've been doing very briefly. But I'm Catarina, I'm co-founder of Shadows, and I'm also Ukrainian, grew up in Kiev, but my family's from Odessa, but I didn't always necessarily really understand what that meant. I think what's really exciting about the Ukrainian youth that we're seeing today is that my generation is really the first generation to have spent their entire lives in an independent Ukraine. You know, for the first time, we aren't Soviet Ukraine, we aren't Ukraine in the Russian Empire, but we're just our independent Ukraine. And we finally had full control over what that meant. And I think that we've been seeing that because of this new generation that's finally had a chance to take control of an independent Ukraine, you see a lot of youth mobilization, especially during the war. Because as a teen, when I was trying to understand my place in the world, this kind of new identity that we were navigating was both exciting and confusing at the same time. I mean, you know, where am I from? What's my history that for so many centuries has been repressed? Like, what can I really understand about it now with the new opportunities that we have? What do we have to show for ourselves? Who are our authors or artists? What are our accomplishments? And who are the Ukrainians is something that Shadows and all of our volunteers are really trying to understand, because I found that the search for these answers and the search for Ukraine really became a process of self-discovery for a lot of us, and especially pronounced during the war. And so that's kind of what the Shadows Project started as over a year and a half ago now. It started as an attempt to kind of answer those questions. And it started as a simple Instagram account, but it really quickly exploded into something much bigger than that. The more people that came across the account, the more I realized that there's this entire generation of Ukrainians, young Ukrainians, going through the same reflections that I was. And we were all going through this process of identity building and building our nation in real time, and taking advantage of the first opportunity we had in centuries to really shape what an independent Ukraine meant to us. And so we pretty quickly grew into a cultural community and a platform that allows young Ukrainians to interact with their identity, come together and discuss and really mold and create it. We're using social media a little bit as an experiment in 21st century nation building. And it's been really exciting and really cool to see how that's developed over the past year and a half, even before the war started. And a lot of people in the seminar today that aren't from Ukraine might come from places where culture and history exists within the boundaries of school textbooks, and where you can see your culture and your history on museum walls. And for a lot of people in the West, interacting with your history probably entails, you know, looking at these artifacts in a museum. But for me, as for many other Ukrainians, this interaction is a privilege that unfortunately for many centuries didn't exist. And we understand, especially today with the attack on culture during the war, that if our culture and history are not integrated into our daily lives, we risk losing it forever, which is why the Shadows mission, I think, spoke and was able to mobilize so many young Ukrainians, because we use social media to ensure the survival and continuity of centuries of Ukrainian culture. We make it ours, we immerse ourselves in it, we bring it with us in our day-to-day lives. And, you know, even well before the full-scale invasion began, we understood that our history and culture could be weaponized. And that's why we wanted to use this platform to make it ours, that it couldn't be used against us. And unfortunately, you know, we were kind of proven right
of this use of culture as a weapon in the worst way possible on February 24th. And alongside all the other millions of tragedies, the millions of homes and farms and playgrounds being destroyed, we're also seeing our museums be destroyed. And this destruction of our museums is not just the destruction of a cultural monument, it is the uprooting of the very existence of the identity, because our culture and our history are kind of the beating heart of the Ukrainian nation. And this is why working on culture during the war matters, because to me, the reason that I care so much about working on these things, and the reason why I think Shadows has been able to tap into this for so many people, is because we understand that if we don't stop Russian aggression against Ukrainian culture today, I mean, my children won't be able to read Ukrainian literature, they won't be able to look at Ukrainian art, they won't be able to celebrate the accomplishments of our ancestors, and that, you know, erasing that future Ukrainian identity and future Ukrainian generation is really what makes up a genocide. And so one of the levels of protection that Shadows has been offering for Ukrainian culture during the war, obviously we've been working on social media for over a year now, but we also now exist in the tangible sphere, because we need to be offering tangible protection as well. And so since the start of the war, Shadows has supplied Ukrainian museums with protective equipment to save our art. So we've donated tens of thousands of dollars in just the first round of aid. And we've worked with international institutions such as the Hoover Institute, and we're working with Blue Shield in Denmark, and other institutions around the world to ensure that critical protective equipment such as fireproof and armored cabinets, protective boxes, fireproof blankets gets to our museums, and they can store their art like that and hopefully protect it in the best way that they can. But of course, we want to keep doing more, which is why I'm here. And I think it's super important to continue to promote that. And it's really exciting to see so many people talking about culture and heritage during the war. And so that's kind of our appeal to the world right now, that we still need to be doing more. Cultural heritage is being lost every day. And I want to ensure that, you know, not only my friends and family and fellow Ukrainians live to see tomorrow, but also our history and our memories and our stories and the centuries of Ukraine survive to see the next day as well. Because I think that it's protecting Ukraine's past is kind of the best way to guarantee our future. And so that's a little bit about the work that Shadows has been doing and our mission. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Catarina. I will have a kind of a bigger question for all of you, but I want to be able to address some of the questions that have come into the Q&A. I know some of you have answered them, but I'm wondering whether it might be worth answering them to a broader public. So I think a number of the questions were directed about financial support, about whether Canadian archival institutions have been helping the state archives of Ukraine. What kind of help do you need? Is it about us purchasing equipment? From where? Supplies? Also, there's a comment from Marina Chernявska from University of Alberta about that the Association of Canadian Archivists had a fundraiser raising money for Ukrainian archives, and that money will be delivered. So the money's being raised. Is that enough? What do you all need to continue your projects? So whoever wants to, maybe Anatolii, you want to? Anatolii, do you want to address what is it that you most needed?
Sorry, I have some.
No worries. You're busy. You're a busy person, probably doing work.
Okay, please. Actually, please repeat the questions, because
well, it's questions. Well, you've answered some of the questions in the Q&A, but I think I just wanted to publicly address them about, you know, what is it that the state archives could needs most now? Is it money for equipment, money for salaries? What is that biggest need?
Okay, so first of all, we needed even no money. It's special equipments. We need materials for our preservations, for restorations. It's a very difficult situations because even some part special materials we buy from Russia, and now we have not a so-called Japan paper, for example, and a special anti-fire safes for documents. But there were many our colleagues from Poland, from Germany, sent special equipments to our archives. One of the biggest problems it's computers, laptops, because in archives in our buildings, which were under Russian temporary occupation, for example, in Kiev region, all our computers was stolen or broken by Russian troops, and small archives in Kiev region now without any laptops, any computers, and we have a plan from Germany, from Poland. We have support from our colleagues, and we want to have a support even to build our depositories. And now it's a very difficult situation because there are many professionals in such sphere migrated to in our region, to in our countries. All building materials now very expensive because we have problems. So money, it's general effects for our support. And first of all, we spent its equipment to our buildings, to our equipments, and to the in our questions. What about salary? Yes, we have problems, but legally we can do it. We cannot do it because it's. Are you hear me? Yeah, yes, some problems have. So all our support, we plan to spend money to equipments and to process of buildings, our depositories. It's a first of all.
Okay, thank you, Anatolii. There's a question specifically to Bohdan about, well, it's actually just if you could share the URL for your website about your dream project in the chat so that everyone can see it. They would like to learn more. And I'm thinking that perhaps those of participants here have questions. What I can do is create a list of all the resources for fundraising, for data storage, and put them up on perhaps on the Petro Jacyk program for the study of Ukraine website, or on the University of Toronto Library's website of the Petro Jacyk Central and East European Resource Center, so that you can go to either of those sites and you'll be able to find ways that you can help. But we have a question here from Steve Maddox about what actions have been and are being taken to protect built heritage, so buildings in Ukraine, monuments, and to what extent are these actions state-directed, and to what extent are they the initiative of preservationists on the ground? And I actually did read something about that there's technology that anyone can photograph these kind of sites in 3D and upload them into the cloud. So, but I wonder if any of our 5 participants can actually elaborate more on this, if anyone can.
This is Anna Kijas. I can say a few words. So as I mentioned in my presentation, I and my coordinators have been meeting with representatives from UNESCO, as well as other organizations around the globe that are involved with protecting physical cultural heritage as well as digital. And what we've been hearing is that Blue Shield, for example, ICOM, the Smithsonian, and UNESCO, of course, is working with people in Ukraine to identify, built heritage that needs to be safeguarded. So whether that's, using sandbags or other protective materials, for example. There's another organization whose name I can't recall right now. I have to search through my notes here, but they are also speaking with Ukrainian institutions, including the Ministry of Culture and other representatives, to talk about preservation and basically restoration post-war. And so what the needs might be of institutions in Ukraine. There are a number of different funds, like the Global Heritage Fund, for example, Save the Ukrainian Monuments, which is a European initiative that is doing 3D scanning, that is also underway. And so, from what I'm hearing, these different initiatives are interacting directly with people at institutions who are cultural heritage workers or archivists and identifying what needs to happen.
Okay, thank you. And I've been posting links that were put in the Q&A into the chat, so people can collect those. Okay, there's been a number of comments from Elke Weinstein about the Heritage Emergency Response Initiative, to work with him to distribute materials across Ukraine. So again, lots of this stuff is happening organically. We don't have a lot of time left, so I thought maybe we would kind of close with each of you, if you so choose, to kind of tell us your pie in the sky desire for your bits of preserving cultural heritage and the historical record. I know, Anna, you spoke about a national digital library. I know, Anatolii, I imagine you want this archival portal, but perhaps if each of you could just, if you had all the resources that were available to you, human, financial, intellectual, what would you like to see happen?
The end of war.
Maybe. Maybe.
With the Diaries and the Dreams project, our cooperation helped us to secure around 5,000 euro for translations, and soon we will have all the diaries. We call this project now like two months of war, because at certain moments students really stopped writing diaries, and we have some activities up until May. So it was like March, April, and May only some remain. And we didn't close the project because still people are writing these diaries and dreams, but we now focused on making a representation, like some website, and so we will have English translation so that international audience would be able to access these files. But then we need also, and we are looking for various possibilities and grants to make a design and web programming in order to make these files available for people from whatever countries all over the world. Yeah. So for this, yeah.
What about the, how do you approach Bohdan and Oksana in your collecting of these things? Anonymity of the dreamers, the witnesses, or are they going on record?
Yeah, here we are very tentative because it's a difficult story. Imagine we started recording interviews in the early weeks of March when everything was really, I mean, it's still emotional, but in that period, it was really dangerous to ask people even certain questions. So we secured also those people who were interviewing other people with psychotherapists, and we had every week meetings with psychologists who recommended us how you can approach people who may have various traumatic experiences. And I'm talking about both sides, like those who recorded and those who were recorded. Yes, so kind of we were very careful with this. Then all people signed consent forms. We received a lot of criticism from other Ukrainian scholars saying that kind of we are capitalizing on somebody's pain. But we also know a lot of examples when people were recorded, like September the 11th event in New York. Yes, so people were recorded a week after the event. And we knew that it will be difficult, but we believe also that this fresh reaction is important. And we plan to continue talking to these people after the war and then in 1 year after the war. And we signed, as I mentioned, we signed with them consent forms. They can always withdraw from the project. They can always ban and restrict usage of these materials. And we strictly follow GDPR. It's a European regulation of data protection, which is very accurate. We do this according to all international standards. So I can say that all these dreams, diaries, and oral interviews are made up to all the recent international regulations in this field. But not just regulations, we are very careful not to damage people and not to make any problems. So this is very important for us. And all this will be when now it's a bit too early to publish everything, but then when the war will be over, all these methodological issues will be, we will make them available for international audience also. So people will learn how we approached people, how we made these records, how we organized archives. And so basically we would need support mainly for programming, for design, and so on.
Oksana, did you want to add anything to the kind of issues of privacy and collecting testimonies? If you're muted, I think.
Okay. Yes, I completely agree with Bohdan, because this life story is very, very hard, very emotional, very, very hard for change. And I think that we will have more other stories from occupied zone, and the special view method analyzes these stories. The next week I will go to Krakow, where will be a special summer institute named Witnessing the War in Ukraine, Oral History and Interview-Based Research Summary Institute, where colleague Bohdan and my colleague from Ethnology Institute will learn why we how we have to record these traumatic stories, because I don't know why I will do when I listen about death son or child. I don't know what I will do, and this is very complicated and very hard for me. But I recording different folk genre, different prose, folk prose, but any before I don't record similar themes with war, because I have stories with war which was in past, and I am inside war and current war. It is some different experience, because I am subject and object research. I think that it will be some very interesting, and will be some new exhausted for me as a researcher, as a scholar, as who learn more histories, more plots, more songs with World War, the First World War, the Second World War. Today I have a research team about Osterbiter songs. It is similar because with nowadays, because I think about people who in occupation, who live nowadays in with occupant, and this situation is from similar both in the past, from the past, and from the nowadays.
I agree. It's very much. I study a lot on the consequences of World War II and family separations, and my own family were displaced. They were refugees. They came to another country. My grandparents hoped to someday return. There were population, and it's so much the same, and stories of horrible deaths from my grandparents' generation, and it's so it's I sympathize, and I want to do more, and I'm grateful for all of you sharing your personal experiences. I hope that this small kind of gathering and time together has perhaps connected new people to one another. Perhaps my face is now another face and a person you can turn to for help. We are very eager at the University of Toronto. We have students now coming for exchange programs. We have faculty coming. We're hiring Ukrainians who have come on 3-year work permits at the university. So whatever we can do, I hope that you will reach out to us. And I want to thank Anna and Anatolii, Bohdan, Oksana, Catarina, for all that you're doing, and please do reach out for support. I thank all our many participants. We had
Ksenya,
yes.
Please, one time, please. Thousand thanks from Ukrainian archivists to our colleagues from Gold Archives and Museum, our colleagues Andrei Chernevich. It's first time on the whole world our colleagues organize a fundraising platform to support Ukrainian archives. It's a very important, and it was first time from all our partners. So it's a new agreement for us because we signed an agreement only in 2021, but our new partners from Canada organize first of all our partners such platforms. Thank you. And thank you for organizing this meeting.
Okay, well, I'm wishing you all a good evening. And again, many thanks, and do stay in touch. And thank you for all our participants. There were some 100 of you here. So it's obviously a topic of great shared concern and interest. So goodbye.
Goodbye.